Yeah, I'm hearing the mic now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the, let's see, I hate remembering the exact title, Reinventions and Responsibilities in the Age of AI panel. I'm Lori Thompson. I'll be facilitating this panel, and I will quickly, very briefly introduce you to everyone who's going to provide great perspectives on this issue. We've got Meredith Martin from Princeton. We have Mia Ridge from British Library. Wow. David Mimno from, no, my brain just had that moment of like, I know this, panic, can't find any reads. David Mimno at Cornell University, Melanie Walsh at the University of Washington, and Lauren Klein at Emory University. All right, and with that, I'm going to quickly switch it up. I'm going to give the quick brief of we're doing, each panelist is going to give a short introduction, then we're going to switch into a mode of prepared questions that I'll be facilitating. Then we'll open up to the audience, and then we'll leave time to have some closing remarks at the end. Hopefully everything will go fairly well. We'll try to be keeping track if things go wrong in Zoom. But with that, I'm going to quickly try to ensure I share slides and that we can get ready to go. Share. Wow, how do I turn on presentation mode?
Up at the top, I think.
No, that looks wrong.
No, in the middle.
Sorry, it's in German now. Everything's slightly confusing.
So it's to the right of format for these?
Fully? Okay.
But maybe? Or maybe not.
Help.
I know, I'm trying to.
No, I'm having that moment of like, all of these presentations look slightly.
Oh, okay, the third one, on sixth.
On sixth?
And then
Oh.
modus.
Modus, okay.
Oh, no, one below modus. This DHO.
Okay. Oh,
Here we go.
yeah. All right. Does anyone have Zoom open and can confirm that the slides are visible? Yes. Thank you so much. Okay. And with that, we'll.
They are visible. Yes.
Hide.
Great. Okay, I'm setting my timer. Can everyone hear? This is gonna go forward. Yes, okay, great. So the Princeton CDH turns 10 this year, which is really great. We started in 2014 because I wanted to build a database about prosody. And we've got this, because of that 10-year purview, we have this bird's eye view of the trajectory of DH. And I don't mean to say that we haven't all been at it for longer than a decade, but watching it from the interaction between a center and an institution that's fairly conservative has been a way to learn a little bit about what happened to DH from 2014 on, kind of the post-TI moment when digital turned into data for what we do. So we changed our project intake process about 5 years ago to move away from building websites and databases and toward data work and focusing on what data work means, critical data studies, and thinking about what it means to kind of build responsible data sets, as Mel Walsh presented on in a wonderful panel yesterday with a lot of folks. So sort of thinking about what it would mean to think about an ethos of responsible data collection and responsible data curation. So 2 years ago, I started the 19th Century Data Collective with Megan Ward, inspired by Laura McGrath, Dan Sinekin, and Mel's work with Post 45, thinking about that model for showing in a really easy to read format the possible impact of computational literary study or cultural analytics to people outside as in the kind of wider world. So what I was really going for, what we're really going for, is a way to hit that sort of middle ground, kind of Verge article level that Laura seems so good at with all of the sort of curated, where's all the book data type of stuff that Laura, Mel, and Dan were doing. So that's kind of what we were thinking with getting these curated data sets out there. So I really admire the AI for Humanists project up here. That used to be the BERT for Humanists project. And what I want the CDH to do and what we want to do is kind of do the flip side, the Humanists for AI project. Like, how do we position humanities to be the crucial question that people are asking when they're doing anything with text or image data? How can humanistic thinking be the not just a sort of add-on like, oh, AI and ethics, but sort of be at the central core of all considerations? So how do we get and keep the attention of collaborators who aren't already the David Mimnos or the Mel Walshes, right? Who think that they know about language, but really only know about NLP. So at CDH, we're interested in training the next generation of students to work on unsolved problems at the border of the humanities and data science. And with Amelia Acker and Tanya Clement, I've also just started editing the Journal of Cultural Analytics. And then we have our sister new journal, the Computational Humanities Research Journal, that Lauren Tilton and others are editing. So we're really thinking a lot about special issues, about publishing these conversations in a wider format, promoting cross-pollination of these ideas. So pitch us. We're thinking a lot about these things. Okay, so we take information in corpuses generally. This is how we teach it, transform it into data, design ways to convey insights in various ways. This is stuff that you all know. Walter made this slide. It isn't actually real, as in we're not sure it's accurate yet, but this is the kind of work we're doing as we annotate the corpus so that we can extract poems from it. So just sort of things that are trying to show in beautiful visual formats what's possible. And of course, this is stuff people have been doing forever. The inspiration for a lot of this analytic work comes from stuff from Susan Brown's Orlando, Julia Flanders' analysis section of the Women Writers Project. So we've got a lot going on at Princeton. I'm going to focus just really briefly on where our position is in the Ivies and also kind of institutionally. So the CDH predates at Princeton, the Center for Statistics and Machine Learning, as well as our new Princeton AI Lab, which is great. And the Princeton AI Lab is the overarching structure for the Princeton Language and Intelligence Center. And I know that's kind of boring, but as we think about AI and the humanities reaching out broadly, we always have to start at our local institutions and the relationships and alliances we can build to kind of get funding and get momentum there. So one of my broad goals this year is curriculum development and bridging across statistics and machine learning and the AI labs. We've been doing it for a long time. We try to sneak humanities data sets into intro data science education. We try to think a lot about ways that we can normalize critical data studies in COAS 126, the intro class. But we really think the more we normalize that, students doing and being rewarded for computational humanities, the more Princeton faculty will pay attention, and that's got certainly pay off in the ways that the undergraduates are attracted to it. So there's hope, and it's slow going. And the resistance we see is really not from the computer science side at all, but from the more conservative humanities side, which you'll all be familiar with. They're even more wary of thinking as humanities as something that has any kind of data. So it's a little uphill on the faculty side, but the students are really into it. One thing that does work though, and where there's been a lot of common ground, has been Natasha and Andy's New Language for NLP project, which if you haven't seen it, is a really great way to kind of bring and translate all these issues together. So the questions that they're asking, what if the large language models weren't all in English? So no humanities scholar, no matter how conservative, is going to shy away from this urgent need to kind of de-Anglicize the language on which most of these models are built, the data on which they're hoovering everything in. So we're always looking for ways to infuse our colleagues' thinking with critical data studies, and low resource languages and ancient text technologies have been a really good way to do that at Princeton. They've made inroads with computer science and statistics and machine learning because they do this, and this is going to sound really kind of jaded, but they do this double duty of making them look good, right? It kind of diversifies the largely monolithic way that some of the CS communities appear by showing that they're kind of giving back to something that's not just, the broligarchy. So I think in addition to this sort of slow and difficult work of changing the curriculum to reflect this broad interdisciplinary interest, we're really interested in supporting research projects that do have impact beyond campus to show the value of humanities to the larger community and kind of giving back. So I'm going to flash a few slides from some of the work that our wonderful postdocs are doing. Christine Rowan is doing an instance of eScriptorum, working on HTR, which I don't have to explain to this crew. And there's just a whole lot of wonderful stuff going on with ancient text technologies at Princeton, which we're really excited about. Likewise, our other two postdocs, Happy Bazaba, is working on African language technologies. We're really excited about this project because it also builds into Princeton's, world, whatever it's called, what is it called? African World Initiative. Yeah, so there's, it's just those things where you're like, okay, what are they doing? What are they fundraising around? Okay, look, we're doing that too, or we've been doing that for a long time. It's kind of, again, jaded. And then Walter and I are working on some issues with literary style, exercises in literary style, and really kind of pushing on the things that hurt for them, like, oh, you keep thinking it's a poem, you say it's a poem, you say it's in this style or that style. Actually, we're kind of experts in that, and we're going to tell you why having us on your team is going to make it better, or our experiments are going to be better than yours. Okay, the last couple of things that I just want to basically flag for future discussion. And notice I'm not saying the word AI, because like it's just machine learning, right? And AI just means people are getting really rich and it's a bubble and it's going to burst, right? Like we've been doing this already for a long time. And it's just branding, right? So we can brand and we can take advantage as long as we organize and as long as we're really cohesive about what our goals are and how we fit into the larger fundraising research programs. We can get grants. We kind of know how to do this as long as we work together. But I do want to say one thing at Princeton that it's been really crucial. And there's a reason we can do this work, which is because we've really invested in the research software engineering program. And Princeton creates this kind of interdisciplinary community of practice around research software, thinking about sustainability and thinking about people and not projects, to take the motto of the Scholars Lab. So we put a really high value in developing ongoing skills and kind of putting our work into the research cycle. The research software engineers are as important, if not more important, than our faculty and students, and I think that's been a real strength for us. Lori is one of them. Rebecca Kozer's another. And then the other quick one is just that we're really small. And we've been doing this for a long time, and we've been interested in it. We were already in this space, so when everything changed from big data or data science to AI, we'd already been convening these discussions and workshops, had data science institutes, publishing Startward special issues, where Lauren Klein and Ted Underwood and others could respond to stochastic parrots and talk with Margaret Mitchell. So we feel really well positioned to address the current moment, but we're also really eager to give back to the bigger community and to collaborate with all of you. So thank you. Are you going to do it?
I think we have a magic touch, but maybe it'll help. Right, it is just this button. Yeah, that's fine. Fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi. It's so nice to see old friends, new friends. And I particularly just want to take a moment to call out some collaborators from the Living with Machines project who are here. Nilo, sorry to highlight you, but it's been a fantastic person to collaborate with. Also, Barbara McGillivray, who's around at the conference as well. Because I think it's really important that we always acknowledge that this stuff is always a team effort. It's always difficult interdisciplinary collaboration. We all learn from each other. So I'm the one on stage speaking, but there are so many other people whose work I'm representing. So at the British Library, we, like Princeton, have been doing work in the field of big data, deep learning, deep neural nets, machine learning, data science for a long time. Also, I think that AI is a marketing term, so I'm glad we've got agreement on that. This is very short, so I've put up some links to find out more about the various things that I'll talk about and the kinds of the learnings and the lessons that we're sharing as well. Oh, I forgot to start my timer. So we've also used eScriptorium, we use Transcribus a lot. We're actually in the process of hiring a digital curator for OCR and HTR transcription because it's so important to the work we do as a library. It's the kind of, apart from digitization, it's the most important part of the plumbing. That means you can do all the AI, machine learning, entity recognition, image recognition, marginalia, whatever. It all depends on actually getting that text into machine readable format. So I'm so excited that the library has recognized that with a permanent post to make that work happen. Again, it's that kind of boring admin stuff that actually makes these things possible. We have had people who've done things like develop bespoke machine learning methods to detect mislabeled images in our digitized manuscripts collection, where the original system didn't have a way of labeling fly sheets and other parts of manuscripts. So they were given folio or foliated in a way, but we use machine learning to detect those mislabeled images and then go back manually and update those records. So it's kind of using machine learning to aid the work that people are trying to do in making our collections better represented, more accurately represented, and more accessible. I have a fantastic colleague, Victoria Morris, who did work using machine learning to assign language codes based on the metadata that we had in Mark, boo Mark, but also yay Mark, library reference there, where she was able to identify 141 languages that weren't previously represented in the catalogue records. And that kind of speaks to the scale of the British Library. We have 180 million or so collection items. So everything that we have is often quite poorly described because of the sheer amount of time, the size of our backlogs, and that was before the ransomware attack. So we really need these tools to make our work more effective and to support the expert cataloguers and curators and others that we have in the library. One of the reasons for our success overall has been our digital scholarship training program. We have hands-on sessions where people can try tools. We have external experts come in, and I'm doing this throughout the conference. If you are doing interesting work with library collections or machine learning, data science generally, and you'd like to do a talk at the British Library, get in touch. We host sort of lunchtime talks online, and those are really great because they give people stories that they can take out to other contexts. They don't need to remember the details of the exact machine learning model, just why it was important, the impact that it had. So then we see people doing personal experiments, but we're also managing the process of thinking about the environmental impact of those personal experiments, balancing our desire for innovation with our desire to not screw over the planet entirely while doing that. And that's a kind of difficult balance to manage because we don't want to squash people's dreams, but we also need to make sure that we're thinking responsibly in many, many different senses about AI. And then we work with a lot of external collaborators. The screenshot is using word vectors to track changing meanings over time. So things like BlackBerry has gone from being a fruit to a phone and back to being a fruit over time in the UK Web Archive. And we've also done a lot of research and creative collaborations or worked with people who've used our collections. This is an example, it's from a couple of years ago now, but when we released 1 million images on Flickr Commons, we had code artists like Mario Klingerman who came in. He used image classification, vector space clustering, machine learning, and some manual annotation to look across our collections and pull out images that spoke to similar themes. And it's a really exciting glimpse into the ways that other people can think about our collections, but also ways of cutting across our internal silos and ways of managing our collections. So we love to see work like this, and we celebrate it wherever we can. The Living with Machines project ran from 2018 to 2023. When I sort of talked to the team about what was machine learning and what was AI, it sort of seemed like a silly question to them because everything kind of was. We were using language models, we were using Python libraries that just inherently drew on machine learning methods and thinking. So we did some work with computer vision models, looking at detecting and labeling features on maps, but also a lot of work with NLP and other methods. And again, Nilo and Barbara are fantastic people to talk to about that work because they led so much of it. Huge amounts of work, and they really show the potential of these big open-ended research projects to come up with new methods. And some of them are kind of utility little tools like searching through poor quality OCR, which is still what a lot of us have to work with, through to kind of really cutting edge methods. And again, I can't cover this all, but have a look at the Living with Machines site for some of the code, data sets, papers, etc. that we've published from there. So overall, projects like Living with Machines let us better understand what researchers want from a library, and that was one of our key goals going in, knowing that machine learning and AI were going to be huge, but not knowing how we could operationalize that in the library, how we could operationalize our collections as data, how we work through copyright, vector space issues, affording compute, etc. So those kind of really boring but necessary issues. We've incorporated a lot of the results into our training program and through the training program back out into the sector. It's increased AI literacy in staff, and I think that is super important because everyone will be making decisions about AI, whether or not they know it. Every system that you procure is probably being marketed with some kind of AI inside, and we want people to ask good, hard questions about those systems. How are they working around the inevitable bias? What kinds of human oversight do they allow for the results? If you correct a record, does it improve the model or does it just kind of sit isolated? We want people to be thinking about those kinds of questions. It's also fed very much into our AI strategy, which we are in the process of kind of taking through the governance processes, and it very much thinks about the ethics and our values as a library. So the Living with Machines project let us really think concretely about how these questions play out when you are in the middle of a discussion about how to achieve something technically. And hopefully everything that we've learned will enable future AI projects. So I just wanted to close with some kind of provocations or responses thinking ahead to the themes of this panel that we discussed as questions. And I think our lesson from the training program is that hands-on exposure to AI tools is the best inoculation against AI hype. So getting someone to look up something, a subject that they're expert in something like ChatGPT, and look to see if all the references that it generates are actually real articles. looking at the difference between AI summarization and the actual summarization that a human would give to an article, because they're very, very different things. Shorter text isn't the same as a summarized text. And I think one of our main lessons is, I hadn't appreciated this, but DH and library folk have massive, incredible skills in dealing with unstructured data, unstructured text. That's the water I swim in, so I didn't realize it was special until I started talking to people outside this sector, and they're like, oh my God, you can do that? And it's like, yeah, that's what we all do. So sort of big up the DH sector and the library sector for doing that work. And I'm going to shut up now and hand over to David.
While Lori fiddles with this, I just want to take a moment to mention that we have a new DDH, Debates in Digital Humanities volume coming out that I edited with Lawrence Hilton and Jessica Marie Johnson. And there's some fantastic essays that have taken a very long time to get into press, and we're really, really excited to show you them. So the thing that drives our work a lot is that can everyone hear me? The power of and the capability of AI systems has increased massively, and the barriers to entry in a lot of cases have reduced quite a bit. So we're in this very amazingly exciting moment. And really the big problem that we have is, I like this diagram, that the things that we thought were possible maybe 5 years ago, is that little small bubble, the things that are actually possible now keep surprising us. There's just a lot more that wow, that just worked. But the things that people think that AI can do is even bigger than that. And finding that place between what we thought was possible and what is actually possible and where the expectations are is the real challenge. Okay, so I'm here sort of representing, as well as Melanie, the AI for Humanists project. We got some very generous funding from NEH, and this has enabled us to talk to a lot of people who have a stake in this and have some experience. And we were able to get a lot of what they're excited about, but also what their challenges are. So just thinking about what is AI good for, the things that we found most successful for humanities users are things like search and similarity. So it's a vector, like turn a document into a vector and measure like how far those vectors are apart. So you're turning meaning into geometry. That's been really interesting, both at the level of individual words. Can we sort of do a soft concordance to find related words? Can we do more interesting ways of search? That's interesting. Curation and data processing. There's so many things where if you have a source and you're trying to translate that into data, you can get stuck on any number of little problems that 5 years ago would have killed the project or taken an extra 3 months. And in a lot of cases, we can just do this. We have this Digital Humanities Summer Fellows program at Cornell. And there was this really fun little example that one of the students had where she was trying to map the network of Cicero's letters. And the information about who was sending a letter to whom is a little text field, which is in Latin. There are two names. One of them is in the dative, one is in the nominative. Cicero sometimes he's Cicero, sometimes he's Tullius. It's one of those things that would have taken an extra 3 weeks in a 10-week program. And she was able to put it in a ChatGPT, and it was good enough at Latin that it was able to parse out those fields, and she was able to move on to the things that were more important and more interesting. OCR is another area where I've seen a lot of interest, a lot of progress. And finally, maybe the most exciting is what I keep calling vibes. There's so many things in humanities that are, it hasn't been difficult to sort of systematize because it's wishy-washy. It's because it's hard, and because the factors that matter are really difficult to work through. I forgot to set my timer, so I'll try to just go. But we seem to have the ability to get more at what humanities people really want to think about. Okay, the barriers. there's this infinite skill tree of machine learning concepts. This is something that we kind of wrestled with BERT for Humanists and AI for Humanists, like how far back into the infinite skill tree of machine learning and statistics and data management and just like how do you use a command line tool, do we need people to go? And that we don't really have a good answer for that yet. It's still something that we're wrestling with. Infrastructure and compute is also one of the things that is the most challenging. And I've seen a lot of progress in terms of getting language models that are very capable that are able to run on laptops. So OLAMA, GPT for all, these are really cool systems and we're really excited about giving people more training on those. Another really big problem is magical thinking. So again, like that bubble of things that seem possible has expanded hugely, and therefore people sort of extrapolate like, okay, it has human level intelligence, whatever that is, and think that things might be possible when it's actually sort of just more something that's emulating what we expect well enough that it makes us fill in the blanks. And finally, just having too many options. So, this is a very competitive space. There's a lot of people producing models. I put up a guide on the AIforHumanists.com site that just tries to list what the models are that are commonly there, and I could update it every day. But there's also there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of ways of interacting with models and figuring out what is the thing that you should actually do for your project when everyone is trying to convince you that their way is the right way, and maybe you should pay them $20 a month for this as well. There's a lot of noise in this system. So we think that what people need, and again, this has been our experience trying to produce these things at AI for Humanists, is especially tutorials and forkable examples. So things that we know work, and if we can give people enough of a sense of here's something that you could do, and here's the small number of things that you would need to do to this example to make it work for your case, that has been really successful. Advice and guides that are targeted for our community. The real motivation behind the original BERT for Humanists project is that there were a ton of tutorials about the sort of early large language models, and they were all like, do you want to hear about multi-head attention? And I was like, no, I don't. That's cool, it's important, but it's not what this community needs. We need things more like tokenization, like how are we actually representing text, and what does that matter? Another thing that especially we were really seeing with the DH Summer Fellows is just emotional framing about what is the importance of skills? Like what skills do you have? What are you bringing to this? And what are the things that you're going to learn? And how do you relate emotionally to people who may be a little bit ahead of you in certain skills? And that's not something that we should underestimate. Just giving people the strength, the support to feel like, I can do this. This is something that matters to me, and I can bring something to it as well. And finally, just peer support, like being there for each other. There's an infinite number of this sort of onion layers of little skills where any one of those can trip you up, and having support from lots of different people where you can ask someone, I'm getting this error, what do I do? That can make a huge difference. Okay, that's what I have. So hopefully it's...
I'm still laughing about, do you want to hear about multi-head attention? That should be a TikTok sound or something. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation today. As David was just talking about, I'm a co-PI of the AI for Humanists project with him and Matt Wilkins and some of our core team members, Maria Antoniak and Greg Yanni. And as David said, we run workshops and we publish code tutorials and guides to try to help humanists use, evaluate, and critique LLMs in their work, especially bridging that gap, as David was saying, between concepts in machine learning and NLP and in the humanities. But the work that we do also supports research. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research, the LLM-related research that I've been doing, because it's crystallized for me some core challenges, I think, in doing interdisciplinary humanistic work in LLM spaces or NLP spaces. So for the past year or so, I've been working with my collaborator at UW, Anna Preuss, who's in the English department, as well as Maria Antoniak and my student Beth Gronsky, on a project related to LLMs and poetry. And there are multiple different strands where we're evaluating how models generate poetry, as well as how they kind of evaluate or understand poetry. And this was really inspired by the early days of ChatGPT, when Anna was joking with me about how bad ChatGPT was at producing poetry, even though it was being very hyped up in a lot of journalistic articles and on social media. But when we were, playing with the models, it was sort of a one-trick pony and could only produce poems in certain kinds of forms. But then a few months later, we checked again, and the models had gotten better. Suddenly, they could produce formally correct sonnets, for example. And we also started to notice that poetry was coming up a lot in LLM discourse and even advertising. So Microsoft was releasing an ad showing Bing producing poetry, and Microsoft has a whole page about Copilot and how you can produce poetry with Copilot and what specific forms to try. Anthropic just released 2 of its newest models and named them Sonnet and Haiku. So we became really interested in auditing and trying to understand how these leading LLMs are generating poetry and sort of understanding poetry, and why poetry is such an important signifier for these different LLM companies. This felt like sort of our moment where, humanistic expertise, poetic expertise, especially Anna's expertise, was actually needed, like the bat signal humanities moment. So we decided to try to write up some of this research as an NLP paper and actually contribute this humanistic expertise into a mainstream NLP conversation. So part of the project we've been doing is that we scraped thousands of poems from the Poetry Foundation and the Academy of American Poets, and these are poems that were tagged by form. We limited them to 23 different forms and formal elements, and I'd be happy to talk more about these different decisions. And then we fed them to 5 different leading large language models and asked the models to try to classify the poems by form from a list of options, and then compared how well they did compared to the human annotations. So these are some of the classification results, and I can talk more about, we could dig into this more, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about how research has to be framed when you're writing for an NLP audience and how results have to be framed. But basically what we're seeing here is that the blue shading means the models are doing better in particular categories, and the red shading means that they're doing worse. So we found that models, especially GPT-4 and 4o, were doing surprisingly well in classifying poems in what we're calling fixed forms that are contingent on rhyme, meter, repetition, and line length. And they're doing less well at forms, fixed forms that are more dependent on topic, like elegies or odes. So we thought this was pretty interesting, and we've been in the process of trying to actually get this work published in an NLP venue. And this process has honestly been pretty daunting and a little bit disillusioning for the possibilities of true interdisciplinary conversation in this space. So publication conventions in NLP are very different from the humanities. Papers are often much shorter, 8 pages or 4 pages. They're formulaic, and lots of certain things need to be addressed. And so there's not a lot of flexibility or freedom to go beyond those kind of formulaic elements. Reviewers also expect results and goals to be framed in certain ways. Again, as you see here, like you have to use often traditional metrics. And one of the most common goals in NLP is to make models and methods better. And we really had to reflect, do we want to make the models better at poetry? And if we do, who are we helping? Are we helping poets and poetry scholars and DH researchers, or are we just helping these big tech companies that don't need any help and are extremely wealthy and exploitative and potentially environmentally damaging? And I think that the capitalistic shadow of big AI sort of looms over all conversations about large language models now, even when they're not directly related or not actually directly using the tools from these big tech companies. And I think that's something that has been really difficult for us and sort of caused some soul searching. How can we engage in these conversations and still be sufficiently critical? Can that critical work fit into these different venues that we might be trying to, engage with in order to participate in certain kinds of conversations? We've also run into some other issues just with writing in a totally different style. Some reviewers have said that our writing is too good for an NLP audience, and they want us to explain in detail like why the models are doing well with specific poetic forms, which requires a long discussion about poetic form and a deep engagement with poetic scholarship. And there really isn't room for that in certain kinds of papers, especially when they're asking for more experiments and more models. So how are we actually going to kind of fit in that humanistic contribution? I think it's encouraging to see new conferences and new journals, like the Computational Humanities Research Conference and Journal, and of course, Cultural Analytics. And I think those are spaces where we're more able to really go long on the humanities part of the equation. But will mainstream NLP developers be reading that work? I don't know, and maybe that's on them, and maybe we don't care. But I think this is a big question for me about where is that interdisciplinary conversation actually going to happen? And can we fit our contributions into these venues without sacrificing our souls and our principles? Sorry to end it on that dramatic note.
It's loading. Okay, good. Yeah, no, it was just delayed, where I was like, why is it not displaying?
Okay, oh my gosh, so many screens. Okay, I am bound to screw this up at some point, and if I do, just tell me. So I'm here to talk about the Atlanta Interdisciplinary Network, which I direct, along with a steering committee composed of Dr. Rico Chapman, who is supposed to be here but is currently on a Fulbright in South Africa, Andre Brock, Carl DeSalvo, Brandeis Marshall, Ben Miller, Charmaine Patterson, and Dan Sinekin. And together we represent Emory, Georgia Tech, Clark Atlanta, and Data EdX. So what are we? What do we do? As you can see here on the screen, AI is an intentionally interdisciplinary network of Atlanta-based researchers who are exploring, crucially, whether, and if so, how to enlist AI ethically, equitably, and in the service of justice. And so what I want to do during my time today, and I also forgot to time myself, but I actually think I'm going to be okay. I want to talk very briefly how we arrived at this concept and what it means, and then try to summarize our thinking about AI and the humanities after what is in effect the first year of what will end up being a 3-year-long project. So first, why Atlanta? So, just simply vibes. Like everyone involved in this project loves living in Atlanta. It's really exciting. It's really complicated. If you've never been there, you really just see and experience the legacy of the civil rights movement as you go about your daily lives. So streets are named after civil rights heroes, but also like B and C list icons you need to go Google to find out who they are. There's this mural of John Lewis that I pass on the way to work every day. There's also the Atlanta University Center, the AUC, which is home to the HBCUs Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta, Morris Brown, Morehouse School of Medicine, which is one of the top producers of Black medical professionals in the country. And it matters to all of us, including the white members of the project team, that Atlanta has so long been recognized as a city of Black excellence. It's a so-called majority-minority city. But other facts also matter. So Atlanta is also currently the #1 city for income inequality in this country, and that income inequality is not evenly felt. So the median household income for Black families in Atlanta is 1/3 that of white families. Or as you may have heard, when the city had no water for a week a couple of months ago, everyone living in the historically Black part of town were the last ones to get their water turned back on. So our city's really complicated, but the end result of that complexity is that people in Atlanta are really experienced with having difficult conversations about race and racism, and more generally about how struggles for racial justice are deeply unfinished. And we also see how some of the best and most inspiring work that takes place in Atlanta is really intentionally inclusive and explicit about the importance of achieving racial equity under the shadow of white supremacy that we all live within. And we think that this expertise, the expertise of scholars and researchers and community members in Atlanta, can be brought to bear on this increasingly prominent national conversation about AI, both its potential uses and its evident harms. Uh-oh, I'm totally not gonna be on time. So we've all done the reading on this. So here you see Sophia Noble's award-winning work about the racism embedded in Google's search algorithm, Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, Meredith Broussard's recent book that takes on race, gender, and ability bias in AI, which includes this like totally amazing, or not amazing, that's the wrong word, eye-opening chapter about what happened when she, as a mixed race woman, was diagnosed with breast cancer via an ML algorithm. We have Joy Bolamwini's work, who is also not insignificantly a Georgia Tech undergrad. Her book about the racial and gender bias embedded in facial recognition software. And then some books written by people involved in the network itself. Andre's book, Distributed Blackness, which deals with how Black people and Black culture have long shaped our current mediascape. Brandeis's Data Conscience, which brings together discussions of tech ethics with practical suggestions informed by her own experience as a computer scientist, my own work, which I'm not going to talk about here. But what all of these books are pointing towards is that there are serious flaws in how AI systems are currently designed and deployed, but also that it's possible to understand the causes of these flaws. And once we do that, to begin to imagine how we might use AI differently, or not use AI, as the case may be. And so this brings me to the second main component of AI, which is the role that the humanities has to play in this work. It is, or was, I'll return to that, the collective belief that of our network that an ethical and equitable approach to AI was possible, but really only when humanities scholars are brought to the table as equal partners with technical research as well as community expertise. So what do we mean by this? In the past several years, we've seen institutions like Stanford and MIT, as well as Emory's, concentrating enormous amounts of resources around AI ethics, data for good initiatives. There's a huge amount of interest in envisioning what these ethical and justice-oriented approaches might entail. And I really like and return to the mission statement of MIT's Schwarzman College of Computing, which sets as its goal to produce leaders with the, quote, cultural, ethical, and historical consciousness to use technology for the common good. Who are the people who have the most finely honed tools for developing this cultural, ethical, and historical consciousness? These are humanities scholars, right? But to date, we have been largely excluded from these conversations. So, we're really intending AI to be a major intervention. We want our program and our project to be really intentionally interdisciplinary, built on a foundation of mutual respect, which I think cannot be emphasized enough, and also a desire to pool together our pretty diverse disciplinary expertise. I think, only when we do that, that's essentially the necessary precondition for hoping to address all of the harm and discrimination brought about by these unreflective design and deployment decisions that we're seeing in the sort of AI landscape right now writ large. So, How's this been going? So, as I mentioned, we've just wrapped up our first year of programming, which has involved some really amazing projects, a successful round of seed grants, a bunch of speakers, as well as community events. And we can talk more about the specific projects in detail if we have time, or you can check out the website, which is up here. But what I thought I'd do now, just to sort of get us towards the conversation, is just to summarize the lessons learned so far. So this is the first one. AI is mostly pretty bad. When we pitched this project to Mellon, at this point nearly 3 years ago, there was still a lot of optimism about the possibilities for AI, especially when applied to humanistic research questions. We thought, like really I thought, that there would be ways to push back against corporate AI and to envision truly alternative uses and practices. But that's actually proven really hard to actually do. The corporate control over model development and deployment has really only tightened. We've seen no more actual regulation than we had a few years ago, even if we can point to positive developments like the OSDP's blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. AI blueprint, I don't know, some configuration of those terms. Biden's executive order on AI, things like this. There are yet more instances of racist, sexist, and otherwise oppressive systems being put into the world on a daily basis. And then we're also starting to be able to document the environmental impact of these models, and that's also looking increasingly bad. So just in short, the positive use cases are really few and far between. There are some, and we can talk about that later, and we've actually seen some already in this panel, but just to move on to lesson 2. Even still, more people want to be involved. So in spite of the terribleness of AI, there's a huge demand in our community for more knowledge about how these systems work and how to engage with them, as well as how to resist them. All of our workshops and community events they've had huge turnout, like orders of magnitude more than anything I've ever organized in Atlanta, and I've organized a lot of things. So people really want to learn about AI, and they want to be able to find a constructive path through. This is the goal. And I find this to be a really interesting paradox, and we can talk more about this later. But on to lesson 3. Over the past few years, I've spent a lot of time reading in the area of critical AI. It's really nice to be at this DH conference where you all are my people, because I spent a lot of time at AI conferences where I know no one. But the reality is that there's just not as much work coming from humanities scholars as there is from folks, especially in the social sciences. And I would love to see this imbalance rectified, because I believe, like truly to my core, that humanities scholars are the very best at historicizing, at contextualizing, at theorizing, at critiquing. We're seeing interesting and important work coming out of CS and critical data studies, and increasingly and problematically, like sort of the more social sciencey side of CS. But humanities scholars are we're really the experts here, and there's so much more that needs to be said with more nuance and more depth. And finally, just to end on a note of optimism, if there are to be transformative use cases for the humanities, it has to be DH that's going to lead the way. So when you think back over the past 10 or 20 years of DH, when every new computational method has been introduced, there's always subsequently been a project or a set of projects that make people stop in their tracks. They say oh, whoa, I think we can finally do the thing that we couldn't do before, and we see how it contributes to increasing our humanistic knowledge of the subject matter. I don't think we're quite there yet with LLMs and related technologies, but I think we will get there really soon. And this brings me to my final observation, which is also an aspiration, which is that I think that our community can also be a source of scholarship that demonstrates the transformative potential of the humanities for AI. Because I could say a different version of the thing that I just said, looking back again over the past 10, 20 years of DH, there has also always been DH work that profoundly transforms how people understand digital concepts and tools, not only within our field, but in a whole host of other technical domains. So I'm thinking of things like Joanna Drucker's work on visualization from a humanistic perspective, Jessica Marie Johnson's sort of historicization of data and its connection to the slave trade. This becomes traveling theory that comes from DH and affects much broader communities. And this is really necessary work, taking on the concepts that underlie AI and its application. And it's also work that I'm really waiting very eagerly to see. So I'm going to end there. I don't know how I was for time, but I hope I'm okay. And I'm excited to hear how this conversation develops.
Don't need to share anymore. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to start with something that everyone's already, I think, touched in different ways in each of your sort of top sort of conversation starters. But just we're all very aware that AI and everything it is and isn't there's a lot of hype around it. But I think maybe there's the piece of what do we, as people in digital humanities, in a very specific, a different context of engaging with technology than, so even the computational social science, yes, definitely the NLP tech folks and really the tech bros. But not only like, what do we do about it, but even thinking about our responsibilities in other contexts and not just the research component, right? As we think about the public or our students and sort of even all these sort of broad other sort of communities engagements that we have.
So I'm going to just start by saying that really personally, I think one of the things that I've had to do is get over my frustration that yet again, there's this moment where it felt like in 2020, everybody was like, oh my gosh, data, it's so interesting. And I was so pissed. I was like, duh, we've been here, and kind of like what Mia was saying, she swims in that, right? And so I think it's really easy to say like, okay, go do some reading and then come back to me and I'll talk to you about, Open Refine or whatever, or kind of get you up and running and understanding these systems. Like it felt kind of frustrating, but then the flip side was it seemed like a really big opportunity to provide some very basic data literacy across the disciplines that just wasn't there. It wasn't in computer science. It wasn't in these other fields. And that is where we swim. And so taking that frustration and that eye roll of like, you people who have been anti-DH for so long are all of a sudden so interested in critical AI, get over yourselves. Taking that, I'm just really not filtering right now, I'm sorry. Taking that instead and flipping it and saying, okay, so be on these committees, write the op-eds, do the work, like step up and participate in the way that we've been trying to build these curriculum and these infrastructures for a long time. I think that opportunity really is something we need to all be thinking about and taking and sort of seeding as something that we do, even though it feels kind of painful because we've already been doing it. That's kind of what I was trying to say, like strategically, we just sort of say, oh yeah, we've already been doing that, you should have probably respected that and given us tenure for it and whatever, but okay, so let's talk about how we can move on from here. And then we sort of do it and curate the lists and build the notebooks and, keep the conversation going, but take the opportunity. So yeah, I guess my point is we have to just get over ourselves and do it, and it's on us.
I think for me, it's the mention of the public that's a really interesting point. In Living with Machines, we use the Zooniverse platform to do crowdsourcing. We ask people to annotate newspaper articles from 19th century newspapers with various aspects related to the dictionary senses or to the content of the piece. So we asked them to do some close reading. But also people were really interested in taking part because they wanted to see how data science or machine learning or AI worked. So the process of them annotating articles that then became a training data set was a really hands-on example of the manual work that goes into creating these things that lead to the machine learning models. And we had about 5,500 volunteers, and a lot of that was just that desire to see how it works. So I think there's a real opportunity to lead conversations with the public about what these technologies mean. People are really curious to try things. That September 2022 moment when everyone got access to ChatGPT completely transformed things. And people also really want to have their say, because at the moment, the conversations are often being led by Sam Altman and people who have like a really vested interest in pushing a certain direction of travel. And that's not where we broadly want to go. So I think it's a great moment to actually take all this work that we've done, to take the fact that we're maybe a bit cynical and tired about talking about this, but actually reinvigorate our practice by talking to people who are really excited to be in those conversations at the moment.
I think we're at an interesting moment right now. I'd sort of keep tabs on the tech bromosphere and the machine learning community, and they're always in any sort of AI problem, there are multiple ways of approaching it. And one way is to solve the problem with math, if you want to make your system better, like you were saying. Another way is to solve the problem by buying bigger hardware. And the people who want to solve problems with math have been kind of frustrated that the people who solve problems with hardware keep winning. But I'm increasingly seeing people realize that there's another way, which is you can solve problems with data and with curation and data care. So I think the baleful eye of AI is sweeping our direction, but we have to be ready to be an answer, and because they will not come to us by default. We have to make it clear that there are people whose lives are dedicated to curation and care of data and collections and looking at sources and understanding how the 100 choices that you didn't realize were made before you that allow you to have the collections that's in front of you. Can I complete that sentence? How those impact what you can do. And I think we have to make it clear that person who does that is a humanist. And maybe some people will say, oh, well, if you put it that way, then that is pretty cool. I thought you just were like jerks who want to read books and get paid for it. So I think we have an opportunity, like there is a moment, and I think we have to be ready to take it.
I don't think I have too much to add because I completely agree with everything you've said, but it was just the question about the public was making me think about how, like, sometimes I forget that there are a lot of people who are just learning about AI or large language models or ChatGPT. A friend from my basketball team recently was like, ChatGPT, I just learned about this. I was like, what? How is that possible? But I think it demonstrates that I feel like ChatGPT is looming over me every day. But anyway, that there are people who don't know as much as even we do in digital humanities, and that like more public writing could potentially be really useful, especially from a humanistic perspective. But I feel like the problem is the conversation moves so quickly, like it's moving so fast, and so it feels really, really challenging to keep up.
Yeah, I guess I'll plus one on the need for more scholarship that presents what humanities scholars do to audiences outside of the humanities, but I'll also say something else that is a little bit different from what people have been saying so far. And it's something I've been thinking a lot, which is in a lot of ways, the AI hype is in a sort of reverse and perverse way a response to the success of a humanistic and more social justice approach to data science. And so in a way, and I'll say a little bit what I mean by that in a minute, but I think I try to remind myself that like what we're seeing now is a reaction, and it's a reaction to something that we did well. And what we did well is this, right? And like in the I guess long ago in 2020, when everyone cared about data, there was a very similar initial rhetoric of hype around the power of data, the people who had command of the data. These were all white men, tech bros, and they were the ones who had the ability to sort of wield this data to their whims. And that prompted a necessary first critique, but then both critique and expansion of what data was, of who could be practicing data science, of what pedagogy looks like, of what schools of data science should be teaching. And we're seeing this now with like UVA School of Data Science, which is actually taking an explicitly justice-oriented approach to how they teach that, and hiring really great people to do that. And the AI people are just those same elitist data science people who didn't like what the field had become. And this is following a very long historical trajectory of fields becoming more diverse, becoming more inclusive, having more women, having more people of color, and white elite educated men requiring more credentials and more technical ability in order to preserve their elite status. This to me is a very legible move, and it is a reactionary move. And I think on the one hand, we can be on the spectrum of annoyed to outright angry to existentially distressed at the tremendous amount of power that big tech has right now because of all this AI hype. On the other hand, we have in the past, and I think the shift from data science to AI is evidence of how we have successfully leveraged humanistic ways of thinking to transform these fields. And I don't think that we should lose sight of that. So that's what I've got.
Thank you. Maybe we can shift a little bit. I'm trying to think about sort of switching gears since I'm trying to cut what I'm saying a bit brief to have more times for the audience. Given all these shifts, and thank you, Lauren, because we have succeeded with thinking with data science, and it's always interesting to remember the shifts of like, we have success, and then there is a response, and that changes again and shifts where sort of the attacks, or not that it has to be that sort of, I don't know, competitive or antagonistic, but like there is this sort of point that you find like there's success in one point, and all of a sudden it moves, and like the ground drops and it goes somewhere else. But what does this mean for like centers, especially thinking about digital humanities and sort of where initiatives have been? There's been the shift to data science, and now it's shifting to something else. I feel like there's the constant shift as new terms are rising. But what has that meant for especially some of you all who've been sort of working at the center and sort of, or been not like whether it's in particularly academic institution or not, these sort of larger conglomerates, and how you have to respond to these reactions and changes?
I feel like I sort of said that in my very speedy opening comments, right? I mean, it's just sort of, you just adjust because you have to keep your funding and to try to get more funding because there's so much funding around AI. So how can you funnel that hype and funding to the humanities, which are typically underserved? You just call it AI instead of ML, and I don't think that's, I do think you have to be strategic, you have to build relationships, but I agree actually with one of the things that David said earlier too, which is, and Mel, like it is our moment in a way, and so it's not that it's that hard to reposition ourselves because people are looking to the humanities in a really important way. I think where I'm seeing the transition or the struggle, and this is something I'm really curious about from your perspective, especially Mia and Lauren too. Mel and David, I don't really care what you have to, I'm just teasing. I just realized I was like from the humanities side, and I was like, oh, this is not gonna come out right. But like, what I really am concerned about as a center is like where to put my attention. Like, I think that the outreach and education about what AI is, what data is, ethical data study, like we're already doing that. I think the thing I really want and need to get at that more critical mass of humanists really intervening is getting more humanists in the room. And these are the people who were the anti-DH humanists. And they're the ones who are still resistant to thinking about their texts as data. They're still frustrated about the fact that they didn't get funding for their sitting in a room and reading a book thing, right? Like that disgruntled body of folks, I want them to write the op-ed that talks about character AI because they are experts in character. That's what I want. I want to figure out how to get them to the place where they can actually figure out how to translate their theories and work on style, on character, on genre, on sonnets, and get them to actually say, this is interesting or this is not interesting, or and publicize that opinion or publish some of those pieces. But that divide is the one I'm having trouble bridging. So as a center or as a kind of administrator, not knowing where to put my attention is tricky because that is an exhausting kind of outreach to try to get those folks to care or to feel like they have power when I think they really do.
I think that's a really key question, and I'm writing a piece at the moment for the Journal of Victorian Culture on sort of addressing like why traditional historians reject digital history and DH so vehemently. And I think sort of tying it back to the conference theme and the panel theme, it's that bridge that is the hardest because also these people have like turned their backs on you, but we still have to do that outreach, even though we know that they're gonna like not be terribly happy about seeing us in the room. So I think it's about maybe figuring out some of the concerns that they have, and I think from a lot of the barriers that people have talked about, they're already swamped, they don't have time to think about these things, they know that everything moves fast. But there are fundamental principles that we can distill and convey and call on their expertise. I think extending a hand and asking for help at the same time might be one way to bridge that. So historians have developed all kinds of arcane skills. They can use really awful library catalogs and archive catalogs. They can brave regional archivists. They can learn dead languages. Like, you know, some of the data science stuff isn't much more complex than learning Akkadian. So I think it's about, yeah, laying out the areas where we need their skills, where we need their critical abilities, and reducing the barriers to them actually feeling like they need to, someone's going to throw back an equation or an algorithm at them, like reducing that kind of fear and creating a space where they can critique, bring their expertise without being, I sort of love the image that we got from Lauren of it's almost like bro flight, like they're leaving the area because it's become, they need to go somewhere else and have that status that they're losing. So I think thinking about that status of traditional humanists and historians and understanding what they feel they're at risk of losing too.
Lauren, do you want to add anything, or do you want me to shift on?
Oh, sure. I'll just say really quickly, you know, I just think it's important to remember that, you know, there is so much money in AI right now and in grants for AI, and in many cases required to do the work, but ultimately you can't do any of that unless you're working with good people who respect what you do, and I think also and you respect what they do. And I feel like my only lesson learned from the past couple of years of trying to do a lot of interdisciplinary projects like this is that, you know, only work with people who truly respect your work and don't just bring you in at the end to give it the humanist stamp of approval. But also, once you find those people, like, work with them forever, right? Because I mean, it's true, like, those people are few and far between, but what you can do when you vibe off of someone and you like have this great mind meld is really, really powerful. And that it doesn't matter how fast the other work is going or how many other papers are being produced in the interim, but because we can only do what we can do. But I think it's important to recognize when you don't have that foundation and mutual respect and not push it. And I mean, maybe you know that you can build it later, but and also to recognize when you have something that's true and real.
Okay, and with that, you've segued great into the question I sort of wanted to come back to, because Melanie, you had some really good points on sort of the difficulties of engaging with sort of the AI development, the NLP, machine learning broadly, because it's not all text, landscape. How and what kind of places can we as people at DH, you know, at different, with different expertise, how should we, how should we try to engage with, again, does it make sense for us to go to that community that it's corporate, the corporate shadows is high, you know, whatever OpenAI is doing is, it can overshadow the next conference because the new model came out. Well, all the air, oxygen in the room is taken. But just wondered your thoughts, because like I say, quite a few of you, if not all, have engaged in certain ways with these sort of spaces when there's always the successful outcomes, and then there's the many that are oh, this went sideways and didn't work. But what are there certain things that seem to lead more to success?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think I was presenting these as my questions for all of you, because these are the things that I've been stumped about. But I mean, as Lauren was talking, I was, and her provocation for more, critiques of AI from the humanities, I was thinking maybe we're partly barking up the wrong tree by trying to shoehorn some of what we want to do into, this discipline, and maybe we just have to make the work so good that people are going to read it anyway in the form that we really want to publish it in. And the other thing I was thinking about is just, this is incredibly basic, but publishing our cultural analytics articles on Archive or something like that. So it's findable. So where are these places, learning these community norms about where are people looking for work and looking for interlocutors. So yeah, for me, I mean, since I joined David's lab during my postdoc, it's been such a learning process of what is NLP and what do these and how do you talk to people in NLP? So I feel like there's a lot of a learning process about that.
It's David, do you want to put anything from the more, that was going the extra side?
No.
No, yeah. All right, I'm gonna do one more because it's something that has been, as soon as I was wait, why haven't I talked about it yet? Just because AI hype, it's all big models, it's a lot of things of please spend money so that your institution now has access to Copilot, or, do you have credits for the latest version, the latest, most powerful edition of any of the GPT sort of setups? What do we do, or how do we think about sort of what this means for lower resource institutions, or what roles can we play the more independent you are, or the less sort of access and funds you have to a machine, anything that costs a lot of money to run anything, what do we do? Are there still ways to have impact? Or how do we sort of shift the sort of, are there ways to shift or sort of decenter the sort of need for compute and sort of the costs that come with it?
I think I say for the size of the organisation, the British Library isn't massively resourced, so we use free tools wherever we can, particularly in our teaching. So you can go a long, long way with notebooks, and you can go a long way with models that are small enough to run on a quite old laptop. And for us, using cloud-based services is handy because it's getting IT to install things isn't a fast process. I think the main thing that you can do is give people time, because there's so much material out there. There's AI for Humanists, there's the AI for Lamb community. There's like so many places where you can do MOOCs and watch videos and learn things. But the thing that's hard is time. And then the other thing that's hard is access to materials that you might want to use from your own institution or from others. So I think finding ways to create time in people's weeks is important.
I actually want to know what people want, because I have lots of resources, and figuring out what is the best and most effective way to get those resources to the people who need them is a challenge. I mean, we don't have the most seamless process of accessing compute, but we have compute. I mean, we have more compute than countries at Princeton, and it's true. And the question there is, what would be the best process by which people can access it for the research that we value and want to do? I really do want to know that, because there's a lot of different grants that I can get and places that I can build, at Princeton with alliances they already have with HBCUs or with low resource institutions around New Jersey. But for the larger DH community, I mean, this came up at Daria too, right? Like, what is the most effective way? Is it funding to bring them to campus? Is it figuring out how to make access to the mount points more seamless, or an application? I mean, we don't really know, but I feel like I have this really sneaky, way of saying, like, shh, you guys come over here. The GPUs are in the mail. Because they always kind of are, They might even build their own data center. Like, it's just stupid. Let me give it to you.
I have ideas about that, but we should talk about that later. But I think again, this is a both-and situation, right? I mean, the tricky thing about focusing everything on like resources, the need for compute, access, things like this, is that it suggests that the only type of legitimate research worth doing is the big research. And like, when you've read a lot of those papers, you know that most of them are pretty boring.
Yeah.
And like, compute does not correlate at all with interesting research findings. And in fact, one of the things that DH has always been really good at, arguably the best at, is figuring out the like scrappy, scaled down version of the thing that industry is using in order to run off of a laptop or off of a thing. So, I mean, yes, do you have like an Olama tutorial yet? Like, I would love for you to have.
We should.
Okay, because that would be amazing. And again, like, more examples that show that you can do really interesting things without needing to access these enormous clusters, and just legitimizing that type of work at the same time as providing access to the resources that you have.
Right, if it's needed.
If it's
for sure.
needed, right?
Yeah.